Could we absolutely milk our monopolistic position? Probably we could, right? Because there is just no other Port of Dover. But what we would really want to be able to do is provide the most efficient and effective route for our ferry operators to operate from, for the people to travel through, because it's adding to the popularity using the Port of Dover. You know, the thing is, we've been around 400 years, right? We're going to be around another 400 years. Some of our assets are centuries old. And we know that we're taking decisions today that people 100 years from now are going to have to live with, right?
Hi, I'm Belden Menkus. Welcome to the Purposeful Strategist, the podcast that shifts the conversation about purpose and strategy from what organizations should do to what business leaders are doing and what they've learned along the way. My guest today is Doug Bannister, CEO of the Port of Dover, Europe's busiest ferry port. It's a critical gateway for trade, travel and tourism that was recently the subject of a behind-the-scenes Channel 4 series, Dover 24/7, Britain's busiest port. Under Doug's leadership, the port is navigating a period of major transformation, balancing infrastructure investment with operational excellence, all while playing a vital role in the UK's supply chains and international connectivity. With over 30 years' experience leading organizations across maritime aviation and logistics, Doug brings a global perspective to local challenges, overseeing ambitious developments while enhancing public spaces and strengthening community ties. Doug, welcome to the Purposeful Strategist.
Yeah, hi, Belden. Thanks for having me on.
No, it's a real pleasure. Just to start us off, maybe you can give us a picture of what the Dover port looks like today. We know it's Britain's busiest port, but what does that mean in terms of size, operations, people? You know, how does somebody who doesn't really know the port world get a sense of the scale? Because I gather it is pretty big.
It's big in terms of the traffic that we facilitate. So on the ferry side, we facilitate 144 billion pounds of trade every year. That's 1/3 of all trade and goods between the UK and the European Union comes through the Port of Dover. And it's destined in all four corners of the United Kingdom. So half of it goes north of London. So it really is a nationwide asset. In addition to the freight traffic that we do, we also do passengers. And we do about 10 million passengers a year. And if you put that in airport terms, it's probably about the third or fourth busiest regional airport in the UK. The difference being, of course, is that in airports, you know, they're foot passengers, they're pedestrians, they walk through the system. And in Dover, we do them in cars and caravans and coaches and bicycles and horse boxes, and it all comes through, right? So the variety is pretty dramatic. We typically operate between 10 and 13 ferries. We've got 3 ferry operators servicing the port, P&O, DFDS, and Irish Ferries. And each of the ferries on the Calais route, they can do up to 5 round voyages in a 24-hour period, so they're hugely productive assets. Now, to put it into a bit of context, maybe, busiest container port in the United Kingdom is Felixstowe, or has traditionally been Felixstowe. And they do a measure of container volumes is something called a 20-foot equivalent unit, or a TEU. They do 4.5 million TEU a year. And if you measure the size of their footprint, it is about 400 hectares of space they have. Well, in Dover, we do about 2.5 million trailers, and we do 5.5 million TEU per year through the Port of Dover. So 20% more volume than the biggest container port in the UK. And if you measure our footprint, our ferry terminal occupies a space of 40 hectares, a tenth of the size. So for us, it is absolutely not about the length of the quays or the size of the berths or how much land we have. It is all about the velocity with which we can move traffic. And it's that gives us our real competitive edge. One of the measures of port efficiency is average inbound dwell time, and that's how long does a piece of freight stick around on the quay after it's been discharged from a ship. Container port, it might be about 4 days, an unaccompanied trailer port, 36, 48 hours. In Dover, our average inbound dwell time is 5 minutes. From the point in time that truck rolls off the ferry till it's out in the market, 5 minutes.
That must be just an incredible thing to juggle.
Because everything is moving all the time, we turn our land over 6 times every day. We turn our berths over 10 times every day. And so we are just constantly moving ships, people, vehicles through the port. But what that does mean is, whilst it is a very operationally efficient and high asset utilization, it does mean that we beat the heck out of our asset base. All of our assets are in a harsh marine environment. So the asset criticality is just so pinnacle in Dover.
I feel like I can't pass by this without mentioning that if anybody's really interested in getting a flavor and they can't get to the port, they really ought to have a look at this Channel 4 series, because it really brings a lot of what you're talking about alive. There's sort of just the pace and the scale and the complexity of what you're doing there. You and I had a chat a couple of days ago, and you mentioned a phrase that's really stuck with me: empower exchange. I just wondered, could you say a bit more about that, what it means, where it came from, how you use it?
Yeah, so Empower Exchange is our purpose. I'll tell you a little bit about how we got to it and then what it kind of means. So, coming out the back end of COVID in the new post-Brexit, post-COVID environment, one of the things that we did is we started talking to our people, and we were exploring, what are the behaviors that you see around this place? And what would you like to see? So it was probably about 9 months worth of just talking with people. That ultimately produced our 4 core values of the company. And so these came from the people in the organization rather than, some consultants in a dark room create a poster, slap it up on the wall, and people walk past it every day and nothing changes. So our core values are working together, exchange ideas and innovate, empower each other, and look after everyone and everything. And these things started shaping about how we as an organization look at ourselves and how we engage with our customers and our travelers and our business partners. And it made a profound difference. But we didn't stop there. We started thinking, okay, but now we know who we are and what we're about, but why are we here? And so then that elevated us into thinking, what is our purpose? And our purpose, we settled on empower exchange. I'll come back to what it means. From there, we then created our vision, which was to create a world where exchange is seamless, smart, and sustainable for all. And our mission is to close the gap every day. So some continuous improvement in there. Now, Empower Exchange, we're there to facilitate the traffic and the freight and the people and everything like that. And all of these are kind of forms of exchange. So we exchange, traffic on and off ships. We exchange movement through the port. But exchange started to get a little bit wider for us because ultimately all trade deals are a form of exchange. Somebody buys something for some consideration. Beyond that, we exchange ideas and we look to learn from each other. So it's at its heart of it is continuous learning. We exchange memories, we exchange feelings, everything around us we find exchange in. Right? It's all about this connection with people and with business and that sort of stuff. Now, this part around empower. So, facilitating is, I don't know, waving people through or, laying out a bit of a red carpet. But given the central role that the Port of Dover has in the overall primary success of our national prosperity and our community, we felt we had a higher purpose there. And that was not only just to facilitate it, but to empower it and really lean out and say, what are the things that we could be doing to make, our business, make our customers' businesses, make travelers' experiences, and make the nation a better place. So that's where Empower Exchange came from.
As you've amply demonstrated, it's really rich in all sorts of kind of further connections and meaning. But I'm kind of curious, how do you define success in the midst of that? There's obviously pretty straightforward, important performance metrics like revenue or profit or whatever. But beyond that, how do you get at the sort of the real purpose bit of it?
It's an interesting question, Belden. And, certainly Empower Exchange, when we first started talking with people about it, when you first mention it, people go, that's interesting, right? It takes a little while for it to build on you. But, as you reflect, it is really rich and it's really deep. So when we start thinking about success for Port of Dover, for this place, clearly, making certain that we generate a sufficient amount of return that we can reinvest in the port is critically important. We're not there to, make excessive returns, and we're not there to drive maximum profitability. As our structure, we don't have shareholders. We're a unique corporate construction in the UK. So we have no owners. We pay no dividends. So for me, if I think about, what does success look like? There's a big operational feel to this, and that is that everybody and everything that wants to go back and forth to the European Union has a seamless and eventually increasingly sustainable journey to get across. So that's a fundamental thing. But also, if we are creating that ability to move people through the port more quickly and more seamlessly, then that is also reducing some of the consequences that the town of Dover faces when we are in very high traffic periods. So we've worked really hard over the years to try and minimize the amount of disruption that our local residents and our local businesses feel from our operations. Last summer, we were highly successful at it. We didn't have any congestion through the town at all and facilitated our busiest summer since COVID. But then because the Port of Dover is so critical nationally, then what are we doing to support, economic growth and job creation and facilitate business? So we do spend quite a lot of time with government talking about what does all that mean for us and where can we find advantage for British businesses and British citizens.
One of the things that strikes me is the extent to which you're consciously looking at the broader ecosystem, not just what are you doing and what are your competitors doing, which is a typical sort of strategic view, well, let's look at our competitors. You're looking kind of around you to see what else is going on in the system and how are we affecting that.
That's absolutely true. Now, whilst we have competitors and we have competition, we've got a fantastic rail link just down the road from us, Eurotunnel. But we're sort of two lanes of the same motorway in a way, and we face the same thing. Clearly, there's competition for freight and travel. I mean, low cost airlines or any airlines really are competition for us. But given our geographic placement, we are the closest point to the European Union. It's just 22 miles across to Calais. So that provides a tremendous geographic advantage. So what that allows us to do actually is take a look at things from a standpoint of a very strong leadership position, because we don't have to worry about the business right next door to us taking business off of us because there just isn't one. And so that means that we can take a much more broader strategic view of things that matter.
If one wanted to be critical, harsh, which I don't, but if one wanted to be, you could say, well, Doug, you've got an easy job. I just wonder, though, you're in this very visible position. You're in a very highly regulated space. How do you trade off the kind of commercial goals with the public accountability?
It's an interesting point, Belden. So on the one hand, certainly, folks working at the Port of Dover, you could, kick back, put the feet on the desk, clip the ticket. The traffic's always going to come. And if people are a little bit delayed, kind of so what? But that's poor, really, right? So the ethos of the people who work in the business is to always look for continuous improvement and solutions, doing things better and better and better. Could we absolutely milk our monopolistic position? Probably we could, right? Because there is just no other Port of Dover. But what we would really want to be able to do is provide the most efficient and effective route for our ferry operators to operate from, for the people to travel through, because it's adding to the popularity of using the Port of Dover. The thing is, we've been around 400 years, right? We're going to be around another 400 years. Some of our assets are centuries old. And we know that we're taking decisions today that people 100 years from now are going to have to live with, right? And once you start putting yourself into that, you don't work on a 3 to 5 year plan, you are taking a really long-term view. It puts it into a very different perspective, that you can take decisions with a much broader horizon in front of you than having to make, your quarterly returns.
One of the things I'd really be interested in hearing about, in the course of your career, you've led transformations, both in aviation and maritime, around the world. So what's different, or maybe surprisingly familiar, about shaping strategy at Port of Dover?
Dover's a pretty unique place, I'd say. It works very, very well. And, people know they're always going to get away and get on their ferry, whether they're a truck driver or a family on holiday, right? They'll always be able to do that. Given the tightness of the supply chains that we have, in the event that Dover failed for a period of time, I don't know what it might be, a week, 2 weeks, we're going to have some serious problems in this nation. Shelves are going to get light, maybe empty. Factories aren't going to get their parts and all that kind of stuff. So it carries a heavy responsibility that you can't define by our port's P&L, right? Just prior to coming to Port of Dover, I was down in Jersey in the Channel Islands. And I was responsible for the airport and all the ports around the island, the commercial port, Coast Guard, controlled airspace, and a bunch of stuff. And 100% of everything and everyone in and out of that island came through one of our facilities. And clearly the residents would have lots of opinions about how those facilities work, right? But, carrying that national weight or, societal weight to make certain that everything works, not just because it's convenient or inconvenient, but because people are really relying on it. That ethos is carried into certainly the work that we're doing down in Port of Dover and how I think about things.
One of the words that we haven't touched on, but I suspect plays a really big part both in kind of how you lead, but also in the relationship between the port and its various constituencies, is the word trust. How do you personally go about building trust with your team, with partners, with the public, particularly when maybe things sometimes don't always go perfectly?
Clearly talking is the key, right? And being very open in your communication, right? As a human being, I'm open, I'm truthful. I don't shy away from tough things either. And so when we're having a bad day at the port and there's, a lot of traffic around and that kind of stuff, I'm the guy that rocks up in front of the cameras and I try and explain it as best as I can. And the thing is, too, that, maybe listeners won't fully appreciate if you haven't been down to Dover. Whilst we won't hide things, we can't either because we got these things called the White Cliffs. And anybody can get out on the White Cliffs and look down upon our operation and know exactly what's going on, right? We can't hide. We can't like pull the rug over the top of the port and say nothing to see here, right? I'd say a good illustration of trust building. It took us probably about 18 months in the end. We developed our long-term vision for the port, our Port 2050 Empower Exchange Master Plan. Typically, when entities would create a master plan, they get a bunch of consultants, put them in a room, they think a bit, and then they produce a plan, and then you push it out for public consultation, get some feedback, and then you go do stuff. We chose to do ours a bit differently, and that was always on consultation. So we were always there. We implemented a platform through one of our partners called Commonplace, and it's a map of the port. And what that allowed people to do is to drop a pin down and say, could you sort out the bench there? Or I remember when Granddad used to take me down to the end of the Prince of Wales Pier for the fish and chips and, all that kind of stuff. Thousands of bits of feedback around that. We also went out and we talked in our community. We had countless workshops with our partners, such as Border Force and Police Sans Frontières. So authorities, with government departments, with our customers, our ferry operators, and throughout our community as well. And when it came time then to say, and here's what the vision looks like, there was kind of, a lot of acceptance because it was just like, well, yeah, that's what we've been talking about for the last year. For example, certainly the effects of climate change. And so then as a port, of course, you'd be thinking about what about rising sea levels and what do we have to do? Defenses and that kind of stuff. But we went further than that. We started really challenging ourselves. If there is a global climate change mega trend, and that is going to have a profound effect, how might that affect us? One of the avenues that we explored was, well, if it's getting too hot to holiday in the Mediterranean during the summertime, we want to go to a slightly cooler climate, do we create the Dover Riviera that is attractive for people to come to? Now, okay, that's a bit of a reach, but what it does do is it shows the depth that we were thinking. And there was no parameters saying that bit is off the table or you can't explore that. We explored everything, but we explored it openly with our people. We had, all kinds of people across the company working on it, our customers, everything, right? So I think inviting people into your strategic visioning for the business, it does have a pretty powerful effect of building trust as well.
Sure, sure. One thing that struck me as you were talking through some of those ideas is the Dover Riviera idea. It sounded like maybe that it didn't quite get the traction it would have needed, but it's an interesting idea. And I could see how, as time develops, some of the things that people talked about that sort of seemed like, well, that's a bit of a wacky idea, might all of a sudden be like, well, remember when we were doing that 2050 thing? And begins to kind of come back to the fore. Do you have any favorites in there that you'd love to see part of the future that haven't happened yet?
We've got some developments that we wish to do in the nearer term, such as some hotel developments and some other bits of perhaps residential property and that kind of stuff. What that will do is that will start to hopefully elevate Dover as a place to come and visit, for people to enjoy. Dover's got some fantastic assets. The Dover Castle, English Heritage's second most visited site in all of the United Kingdom. We've got a Roman painted house, which is the largest and the most pristine example this side of the Alps. I mean, these incredible assets for people to see, and we've got 10 million people that go through to catch a ferry every year, and most of them don't stop. They just go straight on because they want their travel. And we got, 150, 250,000 cruise passengers that come through Dover every year as well. So, we're trying to do more in this essence of placemaking with the town and the community to make it more interesting for people to stop and visit.
I'm intrigued by the operations of the port. Do you ever do tours for people who want to come visit, kind of, beyond the TV series that want to see a bit behind the scenes? Or is it, nah, we'd love to, but it's like asking to go into an airport air traffic control. You're not really going to be able to make that work.
So I do quite a lot of tours myself, and that's because it's a very interesting place and it's highly critical. Recently we had the Secretary of State for Transport down. I do a lot of political engagement, ministers and MPs. VIPs, I've had the Irish embassy and the German embassy come through. We've had a lot of French authorities come through. So we do quite a lot. We don't have a program that, members of the public could just sign up to go do. But I'll tell you what, one of the key features of the tours that I do is taking people up onto the cliffs and looking upon the port. And the cliffs are such a beautiful vantage point for seeing how the whole place works. And you can go up to the National Trust property up there. And I think if you're a member, it's for free. But if you're not a member, then I think it's might be something like £5 to park up there. And you'll get a view of one of Britain's most extraordinary assets.
Coming back to some of what we were talking about earlier in terms of thinking about the broader ecosystem, how do you think about your role in shaping that bigger system, not just being within it?
Well, does Port of Dover have to worry about competition like other businesses do? And we don't. It's not replicable what we do because, 22 miles across to France. But rather than, sitting back on our laurels and watching the traffic go through, we have adopted a leadership position in a couple of key areas. And this sort of plays into the ecosystem. One is digital, and another one is sustainability. Let me take sustainability first. So back in must have been 2022, we launched something we called our sustainability agenda. The first milestone of that was that we set ourselves an objective back in 2022 to be net carbon zero for our activity, so scope 1 and 2 in that nomenclature. We set ourselves to be net carbon zero by 2025. That's 5 years faster than any other port in the UK. And 2025 is this year.
So, sorry, if you don't mind me asking, how you doing?
Yeah, we're on track. We nearly hit it last year.
Really?
And, we've reduced our carbon emissions by something like, 98, 99% since 2007 when we first started tracking it, right? And we do things like we've converted all of our landside and marine assets to hydrotreated vegetable oil. All of our energy that we consume has got renewable energy guarantees of origin, so we know where that's coming from. We have had some challenges with some refrigerant systems, and we've done a lot of maintenance on that, and we've replaced a lot of that. We got LEDs everywhere instead of the more expensive ones. So this has been a primary drive for us, but we're not stopping there. So one of the ambitions that we also have is to become the UK's first high volume green shipping corridor. So in order to move that forward, together with DFDS, one of our ferry operators, the ports of Calais and Dunkirk in March 23, we signed a memorandum of understanding to electrify the short straits. And so that means really DFDS investing in a new fleet of ships, and then on both sides of the channel investing in an appropriate amount of electricity capacity to be able to recharge those vessels. Listen, when a ferry comes into Dover and the ramps go down, 120, 150 trucks roll off, a couple hundred cars, dozen coaches, 1,000 passengers, and we reload that same amount inside of 45 minutes. This is incredibly slick operation. But what that also means is for us to be able to pass the amount of electricity across to the ship, not just to keep it, plugged in for the hotel, but to recharge it inside of 45 minutes. Right now, today, as we sit here, that technology doesn't exist. So we are leaning into that significantly.
And where are you around connection to the grid? Because that's often the problem. Can you get the connection to the grid?
That's a challenge.
Yeah.
So as it stands right now, we've got connections of about 8 megawatts. And we want to provide shore power to our cruise ships. They might be, somewhere between 5 and 15 megawatts apiece. We might have 3 alongside at a time. We wanna recharge ferries. The ferry's gonna be 30, 35 megawatts to recharge. We might have 4 of those, maybe 5, but generally 4 of those in port at one time. You start adding all this up, and you find that we're gonna need north of 150, 160 megawatts. Today, we've got 8. So getting this, and it's probably a dual feed, firm connections into the grid is going to become critical. And we've been working on the definition of what that might look like for several years. We've been engaging with partners around how we might make that happen. But it's also clear that that is a significant amount of investment. So we're looking for some support from government to help us make it happen, of course, because the prize is huge, right? I think it's something like 8% of all maritime emissions across the country are the Dover Straits. And if we can green those, that's going to move us a long way forward in our 2050 ambitions.
Yeah, yeah. It also strikes me, and maybe this is part of your thinking, that there's lots of other ports, maybe not as big as Port of Dover, that have the same problems. The numbers may be slightly different, but
The short straits, or the Dover Straits, this is one route that could go electric and it would work. A lot of the other ports that have got deep sea routes, they're going to require different technologies, different energy sources. So people are working through those things as relates to the nature and the type of trade that they might facilitate through their port. But also, ports are a bit of a logistics hub for servicing offshore wind, say, more renewable energy. And so there's both opportunities and challenges for how ports can be such a strong catalyst for these huge transformational changes. We work together with leading trade associations such as the British Ports Association to help advance all of these different aspects of the energy transition.
it's been a master class. So really appreciate it. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you think listeners ought to know, either about the role of the Port of Dover or its future, or kind of its place in the economy?
We just spend a little bit of time on the safety and security.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure.
So we've got a lot of people that come through our facilities, and we've got a lot of people that work in the port, and making certain that everybody goes about their business in a safe way and a secure way is, of top priority to us. Now, one of the things that we did is, whilst, all of our metrics were looking pretty good, we had a period where we had, some near misses and some observations, and we thought, you know what, let's just have a little look at this. So we brought in a company that specializes in such things, and they did a health and safety culture assessment for us. So not just do we have the rules and the procedures and the right PPE and the right equipment and all that kind of stuff. It was, how do we as a group of human beings look upon safety in our business? And that came back with a result that was lower than we had anticipated that it would be. So that is indicating that our health and safety culture wasn't as strong as it should be. So over the last 18 months, we've been putting a lot of effort into improving our health and safety culture around the place. And it's absolutely true too that if organizations are very good at health and safety, they're probably very good at doing lots of things. A couple bits of feedback that we had along the way, both from some large partners of ours, but also from the company that did this assessment in the first place. These people have expressed it is truly unique that Port of Dover or anybody would do a health and safety culture assessment prior to having a significant tragedy. Because normally it's that tragedy that opens people's eyes, but we started before. Now, one of the other bits that we've done that is really interesting is we started increasing over the last, I don't know, year and a half or so, our use of technology and artificial intelligence more specifically. And we've deployed, using some CCTV cameras, some really smart technology about monitoring people's work patterns. Are people adhering to the safe areas of working? We're looking to extend that into the movement of equipment and vehicles as well. And it was so profound when we showed people the initial results of what this computer vision technology generated, where it was clear that people were taking an easier route rather than following the safe route. And the next day, everybody was doing the safe route, because the nature of it was just so visible and so powerful. We've got it to a point now with our culture that we can have really good dialogues, and it is throughout the entire organization. I had a bit of feedback from one of our project managers, and she was sat in her office out in the Eastern Docks, and she looked out and she saw somebody doing a bit of work, and she thought, I wonder if he should be wearing safety gloves for doing that work. She didn't know. She was a bit persistent. And she said, listen, I just want you to go home safe, right? What it does is it means we're making it personal and making it comfortable for people to have these dialogues. It is all about the ethos of the place. We did the initial safety culture assessment now about 18 months ago. And it feels very different around the place, but we're going to do it again.
It's making a difference, yeah. Do you mind my asking who you used? Because if you don't mind and they don't mind, I'd love to put it in the show notes. I'm so glad you brought this topic up.
So the company is called DSS Plus, and they are great. They were born out of DuPont and then spun out. I'm sure that there's, all kinds of good organizations that can come in and assess your health and safety. But this specifically was rich in health and safety culture. As opposed to, do you have the checklist? Do you have the PPE? Do you have the safety goggles? Whatever it might be. Or do you have your life jacket on when you're working over water? Whatever it might be. And they were eye-opening. And of course, they had some hard truths for us too, to say, we witnessed this going on. And do you think that that's right? Well, no, I don't think that's right. But, really, really eye-opening. Good stuff.
You haven't had an incident, but you just were looking at data trends and going, that's telling us something, and it's not conclusive, but we're going to act on it anyway. I just think too often it's easy for managers of anything. Everybody's always busy, and, to kind of say, let's just see how it goes from here, rather than now we got to do something on this, whether it's safety or whatever, but particularly on safety.
And that's just it, Belden. So I think I've never had a fatality on my watch anywhere, or, significant life-changing injuries. And if you didn't feel like, I tried to do everything I possibly could to make certain that that person was going to go home safe, man, that's huge weight, right? We've got to be just that much better at it than anywhere else is the way we look at it.
That's maybe a good note to end on. Doug, thank you so much. It's been an education for me. And I thought I knew a lot about ports and stuff, but it's really been great. Appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, pleasure, Belden. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Purposeful Strategist. In addition to being available on our website, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please do follow us and leave us a 5-star review. It helps others find the podcast. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.